Okay, so today I'm going to do alcohol ink and just a quick epoxy method glitter cup here, just to get ready for something else I'm going to do. But I'm going to do them both right in this video just to give you an idea what it looks like when I put them together. So I've already mixed up my epoxy, but as a beginner, this is a system that I have found works well for me now that I'm not a beginner anymore. These are those simple squeeze ketchup bottles with the tops. I get them on Amazon, and a 60 ml syringe. And I have part B and part A, and that way when I'm ready to take it out, I can just flip it upside down, pull my epoxy to the measured amount, and then put it in one cup. This just takes a lot less time than when I was using 2 cups and I was trying to measure up on the cups to make sure I had the same amount. This is just faster. So I have already mixed up my epoxy. I like to mix my epoxy up and then let it sit for a minute or two. I just feel like the bubbles kind of tend to work out of it a little bit and it gets a little bit thicker. But I know not to let it sit for too long or it gets too hot to handle. So I'm going to start my turners and I am just going to get this epoxy on there. I already have a bug on there. Do you see that? Already. I put a little piece of plastic underneath here. It doesn't matter what's under there as long as it's something you know you don't want. And this one, I have some drips in my spray paint, but it's all going to be covered with ink. So in this instance, it doesn't matter. If I was doing something that needed a flat top, I would have taken that off and sprayed it again because you don't want it to look terrible. As I'm putting this on for the alcohol ink cup, all I'm looking to do is get an even coat that's relatively thick because we're just going to let that bug sacrifice himself. I want it relatively thick because once I get my inks on here, I'm going to want it to flow and move around. And the best way for it to do that is if there is more epoxy on here than not. So let me get this all on here, making sure that I've hit all the spots because we really don't want a dry spot because that's how you get your little divots. For some reason, the epoxy will not cover a dry spot if you do not cover it for itself as opposed to when it moves. When I do my bottoms, I like to just take a wet finger with epoxy and just make sure it's all wet. Give this guy one more look over here. There's some big goops running around. I don't care about them right now because I'm actually going to let this one spin while I put my epoxy on this guy. And then I'm going to come back to this one and put my leftovers. So this gold one is going to be a peekaboo cup. So it's going to be a honeybee peekaboo cup. So I'm going to put a glitter base on before I do another spray paint of richer gold than this base paint, so that I can have nice little peekaboo honeycombs coming through. And I put this one over here because I didn't want to touch it when I was working on the alcohol inks because I've done that so many times with this double turner that I've just learned to stop messing up my cups. This layer, when you're just doing the glitter, the epoxy method to put glitter on, doesn't need to be quite as thick because you're just putting glitter on here to lay flat. And then you're going to sand it down and put another layer of epoxy over it. So this one doesn't have to be nearly as thick, again with the bottom. And I'm going to let that one spin for a second so I can see where I missed, because I always miss something. And then as soon as I get this one all set, I am going to jump right on with the glitter on here. Just because I want to move on to my alcohol ink cup, and I do need to work semi-quickly with the alcohol, not super quickly, but enough that I want to get over to it and not spend as much time on this cup. So I feel pretty good about this cup. I feel like there's a nice even layer on there. Maybe hit my bottom one more time. And now I have quite a bit of leftover epoxy in here, so I'm going to drizzle some on this cup just to give it some more movable base, but then I'm going to leave some in here. Because what I've noticed when I do alcohol inks is sometimes I miss a spot and I need to put a little extra epoxy on, or if it's too congested with color, I can just drizzle some epoxy over that area and it will spread the alcohol ink just a little bit more so that I like it. So I'm going to take the rest of this epoxy and just set it to my side. I'm going to take off this yucky glove because it's covered in epoxy. It's one thing I wish I didn't go through as much was the gloves. And then I'm going to take a peek at the glitter I have going for this gold cup. So I have a chunky gold mix. Again, this is supposed to kind of represent honey in a honeycomb. So I really like this gold mix, but I wanted it to be a little more yellow. So instead of mixing in a yellow glitter, I have some mica powder that I got all these little packets online for like 20 bucks. I got 50 different colors. It was awesome. I'm going to put just a little bit in my glitter and kind of mix it up so that when I put it on my cup, it has a little bit of a yellow tinge. I don't want it to be full yellow, but just enough. So, I mean, I'm just going to put this much in this cup. Just give it a little stir so it gets on the glitter. You know, fun stuff. And then when you're doing chunkies, you really want to cover well. And after this has been spinning for a little while, I'm going to come back to it and I'm going to take my finger and kind of press it down, just because the chunky glitter tends to stand upright and it makes it really hard to get a full coat of epoxy on it that is actually covering all of your glitter without making sharp edges. I did not bring out enough glitter. Never do. Just gonna put some more glitter in here really quick. I did not bring out enough. I wasted a little on the bottom. I do try not to waste, but I wasn't thinking and I didn't put my paper back. So I'm just mixing a little bit more of that yellow in with the glitter that I just dumped back in the cup. And I'm going to just finish putting this on here before we move on to our alcohol inks. So this is just my way of having an efficient system so that I don't waste my time. I like to spin 2 or 3 cups at a time. Obviously, as a beginner, you know, you may not be right there yet, and that's okay. But I know I can have different stages to my cups going at once. And I prefer to have more turning at once, just because I can fit more things, can finish. I'm not going to put any glitter on the bottom of this cup because I'm going to be coming back over it with another layer of epoxy and spray painting it. So for right now, we're going to leave that guy alone. I'll come back to him in a couple hours, and like I said, just I could do it now, but I don't want to get my finger all sticky. Just pat some of those down so that none of them stick up. But again, we'll come back to that later. That's a different project. So now, onward to our project, the alcohol ink cup. So I've been making cups for about a year, and I didn't realize that I was doing alcohol inks not to the best of my ability. So, the lid is stuck. I'm going to show you a different way to get a really beautiful swirl on your cups that I wasn't doing. So what I was doing before was the first part of this, where you just kind of drop some color on the cup and let the turner move your color around, right? So that's step 1. And that's what I was initially doing. So let's do that. Let's get some color on here. I don't jump right in with the color. I know a lot of people go a little color crazy, but I feel like sometimes it gets overwhelming to me. So I like to kind of see what's what. I'm going to do this cup in blues and greens, and then at the end I'm going to add a little bit of white, because apparently blue and green are my favorite colors, and that's all I know how to do. Now, I did a red fireman's cup this way a couple of days ago, and it came out so cool. So as this color goes on, it's just going to kind of spread out across the epoxy. And because the epoxy is still fluid, it's going to mix, which is exactly what we want it to do. I'm using this Ranger. I think I got these at Michael's. Cobalt, another Ranger Botanical. I'll show you the other two in a second. Get a little more of this green on here. And then I have the Pinata Baja Blue. I've used this one a lot. I really like this color. They're a little similar, but it gives it just a little bit of contrast. And then I also have the Pinata Rainforest Green, if I can get it open. Now, when you do this, I learned you don't really want any white showing on your cup. So do your best to get some of these colors over it. Doesn't matter if they overlap. And if you get this on your skin, it will stain your skin, which I just did, because I'm not wearing my apron like a fool. So I'm just going to throw some more blue on here. I'm not really picky about where I place my colors when I'm doing this because it's going to move so much. Sorry, I know you can't really see that. It's going to move so much that it doesn't really, I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't really matter. It's more about how much color you're putting on there. And like I said, I'm a little more conservative with my color because I'm afraid that it's going to go too far. But this one, I can already see it, is going to be beautiful. So once I get a decent amount covering on there, I think I'm going to put a little more of that dark green on here. I'm going to put a little white on here because the white just makes some really spectacular swirls. Not squirrels, swirls. The white really brings out some of these colors, and then when you start moving it, which I'll show you in a hot second, it really gets beautiful. So I'm going to stop with my blues and greens, and I'm going to move on to my white. So my son lost my cover to this white, but this is Pinata's Blanco. I learned early on that you want the alcohol ink. There are other ones that are mixatives, and those have to be mixed in with the epoxy, and not something we would use for this technique. So I'm just going to throw some white on here. Again, no rhyme or reason to where I'm putting these colors. There might be when other people do this, but I just tend to get the colors on board. And you can see this white is already starting to kind of overspread. And now we're going to kind of do the fun part. So we're going to let this move for a minute as I kind of clean up my stuff. So when we let these move, we really want those colors to start moving together. So if they're not moving enough for me, I will bring my heat gun out. I usually won't use my torch for this just because I think my torch is a little too hot. So I'm going to bring out my heat gun, and I'm just going to really quickly give it a little bit of heat. Not too much. Give it a little bit of heat. So what this does when you give it a little heat is it warms the epoxy up, so the epoxy starts moving a little bit more. So you might not quite be able to see this, but the epoxy is definitely moving. So I'm going to let this spin for a couple more rotations before I get ready to pull this cup off. Now, if you have the cool cup turners that you can just pop the thing off, even better. I don't have one of those cup turners. I have one that doesn't do that, so I have to kind of manhandle my cup a little bit and touch it. So I'm going to show you how to do that just a second. All right, sorry about that. So you might hear Remy up here. He's kind of running through the background. So I've let this move a little bit, not as much as it's going to move, but now this is where the magic happens. So I'm going to stop it. Wrong one. I'm going to stop this one, and I'm going to pull this one off. And I'm using just a little foam stick that came with my footballs that I put inside to help me put this on a swivel. So bear with me a second. Hopefully I don't drop it.
Mommy, I love you.
Love you too, buddy.
But were you making some cups?
I am making some cups. All right, so I've gotten this off my turner, and I have it upright. And the reason that I have it upright is because I want my swirls to go up and down and all around. So I'm going to encourage them by the use of gravity to move a little bit. Hi, do that. So by holding it upright, it's going to give me some of that downward movement. I just want to watch the lip because I don't want my epoxy dripping off. So I'm going to turn back to the side and see how it's already started to move and swirl. So I'm just going to kind of give this a little bit of flow sideways. And because I'm not turning it, everything is moving down. Remy, please don't do that, dear. I'm going to come back this way. And like you can really see everything is moving and shifting. If I wanted it to move faster, I could heat it up, but I'm not sure I want that yet. I really love it when I get swirls in here. So that's kind of what I'm going for. So if we kind of go back this way, we've got a pretty swirl starting there, which makes it really beautiful. And again, that's all that we're doing is we're just changing the motion. So that the epoxy moves in more than just a round way. Excuse me, Remy. Try to get this thing back in my phone holder here. It slipped out before. Not going to happen. Remy, can you hold this stick? Just hold it right here. Don't move it. Can you do that for Mama? Hold. Nope, right there. Don't. Never mind. That's not going to work. So we got a drip happening. So I'm going to kind of turn it the other way. I mean, it's already making some pretty awesome swirls.
Can I not have ice cream?
All right, sorry about that. I got my phone back up. So you can see that I've got some really great stuff happening. I love it when these patterns start to move. I just have to be really careful because I see drippage happening. No, thank you. And I don't want that. So I'm going to kind of tilt it this way and get everything moving back towards the bottom. For some reason, my phone is making this look very violet. It's not violet at all. This is definitely green and blue. So you can kind of see that line right on the top here that's moving just down my cup. I don't want that lip, so I'm going to kind of encourage it to go in an opposite direction. So if you want this to move faster, you can use your heat gun. I don't necessarily recommend it when you're doing this part, only because you will get a lot of drips, and that will tend to ruin your cup. So my bottom is still white, which it's got epoxy on it, so it will run, and eventually when I flip it backwards, back that way, it's going to run down to the bottom. That kind of gives me a good indication of that I've moved my epoxy enough to make a difference is when my bottom is covered. And you can see I have some spots there that are not colored. So I'm going to actually take a little bit of my alcohol ink, which I don't usually do this, but I don't like that white spot right there. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of love. And maybe that one too. The other ones are okay because I think that they'll move, but those two were just bugging me. So I'm going to let this flow down. I have a nice drip happening there that I'm going to turn sideways because I want it to swirl and not drip. But you can see like this is going to be a beautiful cup. Right, Remy?
You put some blue on it.
I see it. I touched my gold cup with this cup. It's all right.
What's that gold cup for?
That gold cup is going to be a B cup.
A B cup?
So the only thing I have to be super careful about is that this doesn't slip off of my football.
Mom, could I clean my hands?
Yeah, in a minute.
What up?
So I always have a gloved finger ready to kind of grab the bottom of this. So once you get enough kind of swirling action here, which I feel comfortable with this, I'm going to pop it right back onto my, Remy, please stop, onto my,
Hey,
please stop, spinner so that I can let it continue kind of swirling on its own. And I'm going to throw in a little bit of, glove on that one. I'm going to throw in a little bit of clear epoxy just to move some places around a little bit more. Don't drop your cup. This is not the good way to do this, but works for me. All right, so now that it's back on the turner, we can play with it just a little bit more. get it moving here. So it's really pretty. Like, I love that. But what I'm seeing is that side has some great movement, and I think it turning will continue to have good movement. And I've got a good little swirl happening there. But I'm going to take my leftovers that I talked about earlier, and I'm just going to give it just like a smidgen there, because I just need this part to run just a little bit more. And by doing this, it will encourage your epoxy to move just a little bit. And I am going to hit it with a heat gun because I don't want it to look like there's a river going through my cup, which you can see is what it looks like right now. So I'm just going to give it a little blast of heat, not a big one.
Could you get all this glitter on my hands? Is it hot?
Yes.
It'll burn my hands.
Yep.
There's a blow the glitter off it. How can I blow the glitter off?
Really love this cup. So yeah, so that's all there is to it. I'm going to let those lines move on their own. And if they don't move, I actually kind of like them. So that's alcohol inks. I mean, I'm going to let this spin overnight. It is going to move a little bit more because I did just heat it up. So some of these lines that you can already see, these are really moving. There was a lot of epoxy there. And then these little kind of clear lines that you're seeing will move a little more as well. So we'll see what it looks like tomorrow.